Welcome to Left Africa.
So, imagine you are scrolling online, right? And you watch a video of a man literally being suffocated to death on the floor.
Right. So it's a horrifying thing to even picture.
Yeah, exactly. It's horrific. But then imagine waking up just a few days later, to read the official police report about that exact same event. And the report claims the man simply, quote, became unwell.
Yeah, it's just a complete and utter disconnect from reality.
It really is. And that's what today's deep dive is all about. We are looking at what happens when, institutional paperwork basically goes to war with undesirable, horrific reality. So let's unpack this. We need to start with the baseline facts of what actually happened on July 23, 2026, because we have to understand how this story split into two totally divergent universes in the first place.
Right. So the factual baseline, it centers around a man named Chika Ibe. He was a 42-year-old Nigerian national, and he was originally from a town called LeftAfrica, which is located in Abia State, Nigeria.
Okay, got it.
But like hundreds of thousands of other African migrants, he was living in South Africa. Specifically, he resided in a residential complex in Belleville. That's a northern suburb of Cape Town.
Right, Cape Town.
Yeah. And on Wednesday, July 23, the South African Police Service, which is widely known as SAPS, they mounted an operation at his residence. So this raid was carried out by the Public Order Police, specifically a unit attached to the Lockdown the Third operation.
Okay, and what was the official reason for the raid? Like, what were they looking for?
Well, according to the police, they were acting on intelligence regarding an unlicensed firearm, ammunition, and drugs at that specific location.
Okay, which brings us to the first version of reality, right? Let's call it Universe A, the official SAPS narrative. Their statement was released on Monday, July 28, so just a few days after the raid.
Right, just this past Monday.
Yeah, and they claim that officers arrived at the premises, obtained permission to enter, and conducted a search. And during this search, they report recovering an unlicensed firearm, some ammunition, suspected crystal meth, and 258 Mandrax tablets.
Right, and Mandrax, just for some context for the listener, it's a potent, highly addictive synthetic sedative. It's often crushed and smoked. And it has actually been a really significant issue in the regional drug trade down there for decades.
Wow. Okay.
So the police are really establishing a narrative here of a high-stakes, successful raid on a serious narcotics operation.
Right, they're setting the scene. But it's what the statement says happens next that creates this massive fracture we're talking about. Because, according to this official police document, during the arrest, Chika Ibe, quote, became unwell and collapsed.
Just became unwell.
Right, exactly.
Right.
The statement notes that emergency medical services were called. Paramedics attempted to resuscitate him, but he was declared deceased at the scene. And then SAPS announced that, as per standard procedure, an independent investigation had been initiated by the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, which is known as IPD.
Right, IPD.
Yeah. So Universe A is a routine, albeit tragic, drug raid where a suspect suffered a sudden, fatal medical episode.
Right. But then, you step into Universe B, and Universe B is not based on a curated written report from a PR desk.
Mm-hmm.
It is based on raw, visceral video footage.
Yeah, the footage it's intense.
It really is. Videos of this exact incident started circulating widely on social media platforms almost immediately. And Abia State government in Nigeria, they actually reviewed this footage. And the public statement they subsequently released, it describes a scene that is just light years away from a man just, becoming unwell.
Yeah, they described SAPS officers physically assaulting Chika Ibe. The government statement alleges the video shows an officer repeatedly suffocating Ibe with a polyethylene bag.
A plastic bag, just right over his head.
Yeah, plastic bag. And the statement explicitly notes that in the video, you can literally hear Ibe screaming, "I'm dying," while the officers reportedly, quote, remained unperturbed.
Remained unperturbed. That's just chilling.
It is. I mean, the governor of Abia State, Alex Otti, he publicly called the footage shocking and heartbreaking. And honestly, I mean, the logistical disconnect here is staggering.
It's massive.
Right. How does a modern police force in the year 2026 release a public statement claiming a suspect collapsed when there is literal, widely circulating video footage that shows a man being suffocated with a plastic bag? Like, you really have to wonder if this is just a massive lag in internal bureaucracy, where the PR department simply didn't check social media before hitting send, or if it is deliberate misdirection.
Well, what's fascinating here is how the LeftAfrica dossier answers that exact question. Well, the dossier argues this language is a deliberate template. It's designed to temporally link the death to the arrest. Acknowledging that the two things happened at the exact same time and place, but causally detaching the police's actions from the dead body on the floor.
Oh, wow. So they're severing cause and effect.
Precisely. Severing cause and effect.
And the dossier makes a really strong point to emphasize that this linguistic detachment, it isn't just a one-off anomaly. Like, LeftAfrica argues this is a deeply entrenched historical pattern. They are presenting a case that SAPS has deployed this exact kind of template before, which really moves our conversation from a single horrific tragedy in Cape Town to a continent-wide systemic issue.
It does, because when you look at the broader context provided in our sources, Chika Ibe is just the latest entry in a very long, very dark ledger.
Yeah. The dossier details widespread xenophobic violence against Nigerians living in South Africa over recent years. There's this undeniable historical pattern of Nigerians being killed, assaulted, or having their businesses looted.
Yeah, and these aren't just isolated friction points, right? They're
Yeah.
part of a persistent societal and institutional tension. And the dossier specifically brings up another recent victim to illustrate how this ledger is maintained, a man named Egwabor Patrick.
Right, Egwabor Patrick. He was allegedly shot in a separate incident, and according to the sources, he is currently receiving treatment for severe injuries.
Yeah.
But the dossier notes, rather cynically, honestly, that his name probably won't make international headlines, simply because he lived.
Yeah, it's grim. Survival, in this context, doesn't generate the same level of international diplomatic friction. It just becomes another quiet statistic on a hospital chart somewhere.
But when a fatality does occur, like with Chika Ibe, the dossier outlines this highly predictable ritual that plays out between the two nations.
Yes, Stewart calls it the diplomatic theater of accountability.
The diplomatic theater, like a performance of outrage.
Exactly, yeah.
It seems to start the moment a Nigerian citizen dies. Like, step one, immediately you see Nigerian officials and civil groups spring into action. The Nigerian Consulate might issue a statement calling it an execution-style killing. Groups like NICASA, that's the Nigerian Citizens Association, South Africa, they release furious, strongly worded condemnations.
Right. But the dossier argues these statements are largely designed for domestic consumption. Like, they are meant to show the Nigerian public back home that their leaders are outraged and, fiercely defending their citizens abroad.
Oh, okay. Which triggers step two, the pacification phase from the other side.
Exactly. South Africa responds by invoking standard procedure. They promise that IPID, the Independent Police Directorate, will investigate the matter thoroughly. They release these calm statements expressing regret, and they heavily reference the strong, historic bilateral relations between the two countries.
So the entire goal of this phase is just to manage the diplomatic temperature, to reassure the international community that the established guardrails of a modern democracy are functioning exactly as they should.
Right. Damage control.
And then comes step three, the fade out. The investigation just drags on. The bureaucratic wheels turn so slowly that the media cycle eventually moves to a new topic. I mean, public outrage cools down because people simply can't sustain that level of anger for months on end.
No. Nobody can.
Right. Nobody is actually prosecuted, nothing systemic changes, and the ledger just waits for the next name. Time is literally used as a weapon against accountability.
Yeah, and the author makes a brilliant point here. Glacial pacing is not a flaw in the diplomatic theater. It is the core mechanism of it.
Wow.
It allows both governments to look incredibly busy without actually changing the status quo one bit.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting, though. The LeftAfrica dossier points out that Chika Ibe's case has a unique variable that should theoretically break this entire cycle.
The video.
The video evidence.
Yeah.
Usually these international incidents get bogged down in plausible deniability, right? The Nigerian Consulate says one thing, SAPS says another, and without concrete proof, the story simply fades away into the bureaucracy.
It's a classic he said, she said.
Exactly. But here, the video strips away all deniability. You can see the polyethylene bag. You can literally hear the man screaming. And yet, the diplomatic theater is continuing exactly as if the video doesn't exist.
This is surreal.
It is. SAPS still released the became unwell statement. It's like the system is so blindly programmed to run its standard damage control playbook that it cannot compute the irrefutable visual evidence contradicting it.
Yeah. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the historical irony here is just profound. To truly understand the depth of this institutional failure, we really have to look at the philosophical foundation of post-apartheid South Africa.
Right.
This dossier brings up the concept of Ubuntu.
Right. Ubuntu, I am because we are.
Exactly. I am because we are. It is a philosophy rooted in the recognition of a shared, interconnected humanity that totally transcends tribe, nation, and race.
Right. It's a beautiful concept.
It is. And following the fall of apartheid, Ubuntu was the moral architecture of the new South Africa. It was the guiding principle of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was a promise, not just to South Africans, but to the entire continent. A promise of Pan-African solidarity, dignity, and a complete rejection of state-sanctioned brutality.
And LeftAfrica frames the death of Chika Ibe as a devastating double betrayal of that exact philosophy. The first betrayal is by South Africa itself. The promise of Ubuntu, this shared humanity, it is utterly betrayed when it is replaced by police violence.
Yeah, it completely shatters the illusion.
Right. It's the grim realization that philosophical ideals mean absolutely nothing if they dissolve the second a migrant interacts with a state authority figure. A philosophy has to survive contact with the pavement, or it's really just a slogan.
That's a great way to put it. And the dossier's analysis of the second betrayal is equally piercing, but it is aimed squarely at the victim's home country.
Right, Nigeria. Nigeria promises to protect its citizens abroad. That is a fundamental duty of any sovereign state, anywhere in the world.
Of course.
But according to the dossier, the Nigerian government ultimately delivers nothing more than diplomatic paperwork. They offer strongly worded condemnations and stern letters to ambassadors, but no actual tangible protection for the people living and working across the continent.
Right.
So you have a citizen who is betrayed by the host country's police force and simultaneously abandoned by his home country's bureaucratic inaction.
Yeah, LeftAfrica frames this not merely as the failure of a few rogue individuals on either side of the border. They argue it is an entrenched institutional culture of impunity within SAPS that destroys those philosophical ideals on contact.
Yeah.
And conversely, it is an institutional culture of complacency within the Nigerian diplomatic corps that allows it to just happen repeatedly.
I do struggle a bit with the dossier's aggressive stance against the Nigerian government here, though. What exactly is a foreign ministry supposed to do when a sovereign nation's police force acts this way within their own borders? You can't just storm another country's police precinct. You can't go to war over an arrest gone wrong. Diplomacy is often the only tool they legally have, right?
Well, sure. And the dossier anticipates that defense, actually. The author acknowledges the limitations of sovereignty. But she argues that diplomacy is only toothless if a nation chooses not to bite.
Okay, fair point.
LeftAfrica outlines specific mechanisms for true accountability, arguing that if strongly worded statements are just part of the theater, there are other levers of power available.
So what does this all mean? If internal investigations are just bureaucratic black holes, what does this blueprint for actual accountability look like in the dossier?
Well, it starts by demanding true independence in the investigation. That's pillar one. The dossier argues that relying on IPED to investigate SAPS is structurally flawed because it is still the South African government investigating South African police. LeftAfrica demands that the Nigerian government use its diplomatic weight to insist on international observation of the investigation.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. They argue Nigeria has the geopolitical standing to demand transparency, but routinely chooses the path of least resistance.
Because police investigating police rarely yields a meaningful conviction anywhere in the world, right? It usually just results in an internal disciplinary review, which isn't a consequence for a lost life. It's basically an HR procedure.
Exactly.
Which ties into the dossier's demand for real criminal consequences. That's the second pillar. If video evidence shows officers suffocating a man, the dossier insists those specific officers must face criminal trial and imprisonment, not just a quiet reassignment or a temporary suspension with pay.
Right. Real prison time.
Yeah.
And that leads directly into the necessity of systemic reform, the third pillar. South Africa cannot simply manage the public relations fallout of individual deaths.
Yeah.
They have to fix the machinery that is actually causing the deaths. The dossier demands a complete overhaul of SAPS training, oversight, and internal culture. Firing one officer doesn't fix a unit that casually employs a polyethylene bag during a drug raid.
No, it doesn't. Which brings us back to those alternative levers of power you mentioned earlier for the fourth pillar. The dossier is effectively calling out the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, telling them to move beyond just issuing statements. They're saying, look, you have a massive diplomatic budget, you have embassies, you have immense economic ties with South Africa, you have the leverage to explore international legal avenues, apply targeted economic pressure, and demand public data transparency about how many migrants are actually dying in custody.
Yeah, it is a very stark indictment of the status quo. It shifts the burden of action from simply blaming the perpetrators to actively challenging the protectors.
Yeah, that's a good way to frame it.
The dossier demands that those with the geopolitical power to intervene actually utilize that power rather than just, narrating the tragedy for their domestic audience. A press release is not a strategy for systemic change.
So to pull all of this together for you, the listener, we started today with two distinct universes. On one side, we have a bureaucratic cover story, meticulously crafted through linguistic architecture, a passive, sanitized narrative where a man simply became unwell during a police raid.
Universe A.
Right. And on the other side, we have irrefutable, horrifying video evidence of a 42-year-old man from Lukpaku dying violently on the floor of a Cape Town suburb. And right now, the entire world is watching these two versions of reality battle it out in real time.
Yeah. And this raises an important question, and it is the haunting final thought posed by the LeftAfrica dossier.
Yeah.
How many more?
Yeah.
How many more bodies, how many more names will be quietly added to the ledger before this endless loop of diplomatic theater is finally replaced by genuine structural accountability?
It is a heavy question. And as we wrapped up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, kind of building on that idea. Because the dossier puts immense pressure on governments to act, specifically because this visual evidence exists, right?
Right.
It assumes that seeing is believing, and that believing demands immediate action. But it really makes you wonder about our role in all of this as digital citizens holding the screen.
That's for sure.
Just think about your own social media feeds. We are constantly exposed to undeniable video footage of atrocities, accidents, and injustices from all over the globe. And if this kind of graphic trauma can just be seamlessly absorbed into standard bureaucratic, diplomatic theater by the powers that be, does the sheer volume of trauma we witness online actually make it easier for institutions to wait out our outrage?
That's a really dark thought, but it's very possible.
Right. We get mad, we scroll to the next video, and we forget. The next time a shocking video starts trending and everyone is furiously sharing it, ask yourself, are we actually holding power accountable, or are we just eagerly watching the first act of the theater?
Wow. Something to think about, definitely.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the LeftAfrica dossier. Take care of yourselves, stay curious, and we will catch you next time.